So, all right, it's 2 minutes after. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Um, and this is I'm going to call this version one of Conformation and Soundness. As I started, putting this information together, I just kept finding more and more things that I wanted to add. And so it's a really big topic. So we're gonna get into it, and I think we're gonna have a few more of these sessions and probably continue to flesh out more and more as we go. Um, and part of what makes it complicated with Icelandic sheep in particular is that we've got a lot of variation in the breed. It is a natural, what we call a land race. And so it's basically the definition is it comes from a particular geographical region, which means that you will have a variety of things that came from the founder population and have diverged over time into various specialties. We like to talk a lot about how Icelandics are a triple purpose breed. I'd say that's both true and not true. Um, and there's some things that are specific to Icelandics, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is actually just good sheep conformation and health. With those disclaimers, we'll go ahead and get into it. If somebody could keep an eye on the chat, we'll definitely have some time for questions towards the end. But I'm not going to be able to keep an eye on chat while I'm also going through the little slideshow that I put together. So I'll just go ahead and start into that then. We are also, by the way, attempting to record this, and hopefully we'll be able to post that, since that's a common request after we've had some of these topic-focused seminars. So, Icelandic sheep. I gotta get to my screen sharing window here. And I gotta get rid of my participants view. Okay, so at the most basic, what do we mean when we say conformation and soundness? The conformation of an animal is basically their shape, their proportions. It's created by their skeleton, their muscling. A lot of that is genetic. It can also be developmental. Things like body condition, feed, fatness, skinniness can definitely hide or expose faults. But generally, the animal is what they are. When we talk about soundness, we mean the health, performance, and soundness especially means the movement of an animal. Does it move soundly? Does it hold up? Does it have premature failures or lameness or arthritis or other issues that affect its longevity? Performance is how well a given animal grows, thrives, reproduces, and generally performs in your flock, in your management system, in your ecosystem. Phenotype refers to the external appearance of an animal, which can show you things about genetics, but there's a lot of things that you can't see in the phenotype. Whereas the genotype is the full set of genetic information that the animal has and may pass on to its offspring. So, very, very general sheep, but I think we should all be able to agree on. You can go and you can look, and there are a lot of really great references out there to sheep conformation, and most of it applies as well to Icelandics as it does to any other breed. All sheep should have good teeth, good mouth. They should be able to eat. All sheep should have good legs, joints, hooves. All sheep should have a healthy body, torso, a good heart and lung system. They should all have good rumen capacity. And that this is any sheep that is alive. If sheep do not have these things, they are going to suffer a poor quality of life. They're going to struggle more than their flock mates. They are going to be basically set up to an unfair advantage. Now, I'm not going to say these sheep don't deserve to live, but just consider carefully the welfare of all your animals when you choose what to produce and what to keep around. And then when it comes to breeding, all breeding animals should have functional and correct organs and gonads. They should be able to bear healthy lambs that don't have defects, that grow, that thrive. And it's our job as breeders to make sure that we're trying to set everybody up for the most success and welfare and happy life as possible. But remember always, Icelandic sheep are sheep. They are not special unicorns to whom the rules do not apply, where we should allow certain, faults or issues to persist in the breed, just because they're somehow different or special. They are still sheep, they're mammals, and it's our job to keep them healthy and happy. So with that said, I'm gonna talk a bunch about defects, because defects are something that nobody likes to talk about, but I can tell you that if you breed sheep for long enough, you will see defects. Eventually, sooner or later, you're gonna have lambs that come out not right. It might be obvious when they're born. It might not show up until later. There might be things that, I'd kind of call latent or subtle defects that they look fine, but when it comes out in their performance. So that's a thing. And just some kind of glossary stuff, notes on defects. A lot of people hear congenital defects and you assume that means, oh, it's genetic or whatever. No, that just means that it was present when the lamb was born. Heritable defects are something we definitely want to pay attention to and detect in our flocks. Developmental can be not because of genetics, it's because of how the ewe was fed during pregnancy. Did she eat toxic plants? Did she pick up a disease? Some of them were insect-borne during pregnancy, and they can really mess up your lambs. And lastly, my personal philosophy, I'm going to talk a lot about culling here, but sometimes we can get answers about what happened. Why did this lamb come out wrong? Is there something wrong with the parents or not? But when in doubt, eat it, or you could also soft cull it. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Some of the more common heritable defects that we see in Icelandic sheep, I think that the most common is bite problems. There are a lot of sheep that have underbites, overbites. They can be born without a fully complete GI tract. They can be, rams can have problems with not having both testicles, at least externally palpable. And there is one particular disease that is specific to Icelandic sheep that they are researching in Iceland. I believe that there have been cases of this in North America. They're actually trying to identify a genetic test for it. There have in fact been station rams available from the insemination station that turned out to have the recessive genetics for this and pass it. And that becomes very immediately obvious in Iceland when you've got hundreds of people might have offspring from a particular ram. It becomes obvious pretty clearly when there's something inheritable there. Things that are not really commonly found or talked about. Entropion is an eyelid problem. That's not something we hear a lot about here in North America, but it can be associated with some of the genes that have the four-horned or polyceric 4 to 6 horn genetics. And one that you'll hear or see a lot when you look up these kinds of disorders, genetic disorders in sheep, and it's one that you can actually test for genetically, is the spider lamb, but we don't even have that in our gene pool as far as we know. So I'm going to talk about bite defects a lot because, again, they are so common. This is a visual I got from a great presentation out of an Australian source that talks about degrees of severity of bite defects. When it's a slight defect, you may not even notice it. I've myself had a lamb that had a very slight parrot mouth that I didn't even notice it until it was about 2 or 3 months old. Obviously, when something comes out looking more like the severe option, it's usually pretty noticeable, and it is often incompatible with life. Speaking of parrot mouth in particular, here's some example photos of this. Is a very, very subtle case. This is the one that I didn't notice for several months. And it's important to distinguish. There's the upper lip and the jaw, but what matters the most is where the teeth meet the pad. And so some sheep are kind of like lippy. Their upper lip is really fleshy. And I think of them like the Simpsons characters. So it's important, if you see something like this, actually look at the lamb, part its lips, see where the teeth meet the pad, and actually see, is it an actual bite problem or is it just a lippy lamb? But this kind of thing, it can be just very subtle. This here you can see is a bit more, probably a little bit more pronounced. The photo on the right is a lamb that was born that it was like a full ½ inch back, and he was unable to latch and he died a few days later. I wasn't sure if he could make it or not. And in retrospect, if I had another lamb like that today, I would just humanely euthanize it shortly after birth. So I just kind of wasn't sure if that would really be a problem, if he would be able to feed or not. But I just want to emphasize how common this is in Icelandic sheep and how important it is to check all of your lambs. By the time they're born, you should be able to see it, or by the time they're 2 to 3 months old, it's a good idea to just check every sheep in your flock, check and see where their teeth and their bite is at. You might have something that you didn't notice or haven't dealt with it before. And I just want to emphasize that these are just very, very common, and it doesn't mean that your flock is bad or defective. It's just something that when you see it, you need to identify it, and especially don't use it for breeding. Some other types of defects that have nothing to do with genetics. If you've given a valbazine, albendazole, fenbendazole class dewormer early in pregnancy, that can cause defects. There are several types of infectious diseases. The most common ones in North America would be Cache Valley and blue tongue. If you're in an area with certain plants, the most astonishing one is this. It's called California false hellebore. It's got a few other names, but you can get if your ewes graze that when they're pregnant, you can get cyclops lambs, which I mean literally it's like one eye in the middle of their face. It's very, very dramatic. There are lots of nutrient deficiencies. The two most common ones that I think are the most widespread are iodine deficiency and selenium deficiency. And when you've got something like a nutrition problem or a disease infection, noting, by the way, that both blue tongue and Cache Valley can be spread by insects. And so you may have it one year, you may not have it another, and it'll just seem like it came out of nowhere. But what you'll see is multiple lambs in the crop that year are affected, and they're not related to each other. There's no link. It might be possible to confirm that with testing of like fetal remains. Usually these kind of things, they don't just cause deformities, but they'll also cause like abortion storms or lots of stillborns, in which case, if you're seeing something like that on like a systemic level, that would be a good idea to take one of the affected lambs and send it to your local veterinary diagnostic laboratory. And they might be able to actually identify and confirm the presence of one of these diseases. There's other diseases around the world, like Schmallenberg is very common in Europe, but I don't believe that we've had that in North America yet. That being said, a lot of these diseases are becoming more globalized, where previously they were very regional. With climate change, things like blue tongue have spread their range and become endemic in more locations. And I always say, when in doubt, just eat it. So, and this is where it gets back to, it's important to understand that there might be reasons that weren't genetic. So if I think it's something that's systemic, nutritional disease, I'm not going to call the parents, but just consider carefully whether you're keeping or retaining lambs from an affected year. If you start seeing a pattern, look for patterns and have that inform your culling decisions, because I think a lot of times we look at things and we sort of wave things away like, oh, well, maybe I just didn't have my minerals right, and that's why I got all these parrot mouths one year. It's like, no, parrot mouth is generally genetic. So you have to be careful to like consider what you have in your flock, what you're working with for genetics, where you got your source flock from. Most of these genes are around. And it's good to try to troubleshoot it, but it's hard to get actual concrete answers. And when you look at a lamb, it might be your best looking ram lamb of the year, has a slight bite issue, and you think, well, how bad is it really? I wouldn't use it in a ram. That's where it's just better to avoid borrowing more trouble and propagating problematic genes. And yet, that being said, as with all breeding, everything has to be taken into context. There have been station rams in Iceland that you can see in the Frutaskrá, the ram catalog, that some of them even just straight up say, well, yeah, 10% of his lambs have bite defects, just FYI, but they consider, his other attributes as far as like loin muscling and other traits to be worth it. And they just say, well, just cull harden the offspring. And that's something that I think is obviously a choice. If you're running a production flock, if you're doing a lot of terminal offspring breeding, meaning you're planning to butcher and eat most of the offspring, then Sure, that's a choice that you can make. Um, I would caution against that, given that the culture of how we breed sheep in North America is not as high cull, and we tend to keep a lot of animals around that aren't that do have problems like this, or we may sell them to people who also don't believe in culling. So I think we should be a little bit more cautious about things like that, especially if you have a ram that you know has thrown offspring with problems. Um, so that's where I stand on that, obviously. And so to talk more about culling, at the most basic level, we mean removing the animal from breeding. That could be, we call soft culling. You might just, weather the little ram lambs or sell a ewe to someone with the understanding that this ewe shouldn't be bred, or she should be a fiber pet. Um, and of course, there is hard culling, which we mean euthanasia or slaughtering. And something to strongly consider with the option of soft culling. If it's a ram lamb that can be weathered, that's a very safe and secure way to be sure that he's been removed from the breeding population. My experience and the experience of many folks with selling fiber pets or selling off an animal as unregistered in the hopes that that'll kind of end the line there. If a ewe's out there and there's a ram within, I don't know, a mile radius, she's going to get bred at some point. And so that's something to consider, that you can't control what happens to a sheep when it leaves your property. And sometimes we can't even control what happens to sheep when they're on our own properties, as I can attest to. Rams can be very determined. And you trying to hold an animal back so that it doesn't get bred and pass some issue on, can be impossible at times. So that's just something to consider. Um, my personal recommendations, I'm not saying this is his bonus stance, but this is where I'm at, is always cull, from breeding at least, the animal that has the defect. And I'll almost always cull the ram if he's been known to sire offspring with defects, if I'm very sure that that's a thing, that's a heritable condition from him. Ideally also cull ewes. But this is also something where it can be hard to tell, it can be hard to untangle what happened and why. You don't get as good a sample size with ewes because you only get usually 2 lambs a year. And so I might give a ewe another try. I might see if she shows the problem again. But I'll keep an eye on things, because if I have a ewe that, say, one year had an offspring with an issue, the next year, I probably cull those offspring. And then the next year, if I give her another try, maybe they come out looking great. I wouldn't sell them. Or if I sold them, it would be with a lot of very careful disclosure to someone that also will keep an eye on this and is aware that this has been known to happen in this line. So just keep an eye out. But it's important to try to stamp it out. Now, at what point do you say, well, do you go full scorched earth and, cull the sire and the dam and then go up the lines? Well, how far do you go? How do you know where it came from? It can be impossible to actually untangle. We don't have the kind of genetic testing yet where we can do this. Most of these things are multifactorial. And at a certain point, if you culled every sheep that had any one thing wrong with them, you might not have any sheep left. So you have to keep it in balance and keep it in perspective. That's what I'm saying. So let's talk a little bit more about conformation as it pertains, especially to Icelandic sheep. With Icelandic sheep, you can have a lot of variety. We often say everybody likes to repeat triple purpose, milk, meat, and fiber. They're all triple purpose. And I would say that the longer you breed these sheep, the more you find out that some of them are really good at one or two out of the three. Very few of them are great at all three, and then can pass it on reliably. And most of the times, if you work really hard on one thing, you're probably going to lose focus on some of the others, especially things that like milkiness, which are hard to tell when you've lost it until 1 or 2 years later, you find out that the ram you used for breeding, you don't find out until his daughters get bred that their milking is worse than their dams was, and that they got downgraded by their sire. You can't see it. That's the problem with a lot of these traits. There's a lot of inborn traits. And so this is just something to know. This is breeding. This is just the problem with breeding in general, is trying to keep traits good and consistent. You have to pay a lot of attention, collect a lot of data, and you also have to get lucky. So I've had two parents, amazing parents themselves, produce absolute flops and duds. And sometimes you don't know until you do it. So these are just some very basic things. This is an area where I ran out of time preparing this in terms of there are so many, like I could do probably 5 slides on legs, 5 slides on hooves, on every body part. But I wanted to try to give at least a basic overview. But the important thing is, when we talk about legs and hooves, legs should be straight. They should have nice straight legs. They should have good pasterns that are in line with the hoof. You shouldn't be seeing knock knees or bow legs. You shouldn't be seeing really knobby, bulgy joints. Um, Sheep should have clean, straight, functional legs. And when it comes to hooves, this is an example I grabbed randomly off of Google image search, that should show a nice, good, symmetrical hoof. A lot of sheep that I've had over the years, one side is bigger than the other, often the inside, especially in the rear hooves. It's normal for the rear hooves to be a bit smaller than the front, but you see a lot of sheep where you've got a lot of asymmetry. One pad is very thick and broad, and the other one is this little skinny crescent thing. And hooves like that are always going to grow unevenly, wear unevenly, and splay out. When you trim your sheep's hooves, which you should be doing, well, the bottom line is as often as is necessary. They should trim up well into a good shape. If a sheep, every time you go to trim it, needs lots of corrective trimming more than a few times a year, frequent trimming to keep them in a semblance of symmetry, that's going to tell you that either the hooves themselves, the feet themselves, or there's something about the animals like angles and body build that's contributing to the problem. The best sheep that I've had that have the best hooves, even if I go a month or two longer than I should have between trims, when I go to trim them, after I'm done trimming, the hoof looks just like this. It's amazing. It's just good feet just work. Poor feet that curl, that splay, are going to be prone to hoof rot and prone to problems. And the sheep they're gonna have eventual problems with mobility and lameness as they get older, especially. So kind of going through the animal front to back here, when we talk about shoulders and ribs, shoulders, I don't want to like see the shoulders when I look at a sheep. When you see big lumpy shoulder, big bulky broad muscles, that can, especially if you're breeding for carcass and meat, you can end up with, that can be a focus where you want more bulk, more muscling. It can also cause more problems with dystocia and more problems with mobility and with getting lambs out alive. Ideally, you want shoulders that are smooth, and the body that the shoulders are attaching to should be deep, vertically tall. Sometimes what looks like lumpy shoulders is actually just a smaller rib cage, in fact. The problem here isn't this shoulder size, it's the size of what it's attaching to. So that's the thing to be on the lookout for. In my experience, I've found that the more narrow constricted rib cage can often be correlated with higher rates of respiratory problems and also heat tolerance, which is becoming more relevant every year. For top line and back, ideally you want this, I call it, the laser level top line. You want a nice smooth back, long, even back. These are very nicely strong shoulders. There's a lot of good muscling here, but they're not proud or prominent. They don't stick up. They're attached to a really nice, long, deep body, front to back. When you see dips and lumps, and here we've got the shoulders, have a bit of a hump to them, and then there's a little dip behind the shoulder, and then it goes up again, and then it goes down again. It's like a little roller coaster. This is not as good of a top line as the one, say, on the left. Croup angle. This is another thing that this is probably my biggest argument with most of these standard sheep conformation stuff that's out there. There's a very good PDF out there that CSBA, Canadian Sheep Breeders, produces that I often reference, that has lots of great pictures and comparisons of shoulders, backs, top lines, etc. But the big thing I disagree with is that they would consider the ewe on the right's croup by which I mean her rump here, they would consider that sloping angle to be too steep, and they would consider that faulty. They would consider this sort of very flat, shallow croup. So basically from the neck to the tail, it just looks all the way straight. A lot of cattle, a lot of sheep breeds, we call them the tubular sheep. They're just completely straight from front to back. But what you see if you look at animals in the wild, if you look at deer and elk, they have lower rumps, they have sloping rumps. There is a lot of people are starting to realize now that they've gone too far with going for this really flat, shallow croup angle, that they're seeing more dystocias and more problems with that. But if you look at just about any club sheep, any show sheep focus, they want like from neck to tail, it's just a completely straight line. And I personally don't think that that's biologically healthy. I think you're going to run into more problems with that. So body depth. These are three very differently built sheep that I've included as an example. The sheep on the left is deep in front, very long here. She's a bit small behind, I'd say. Her kind of pelvis rear end is not as equally matched to her shoulders, but she's deep and she's long vertically and lengthwise. The sheep in the middle has some really nice length, but she's what I would consider a shallow body. It's just from the top of her shoulders to the bottom of her brisket is just not that deep. And that continues to the back as well. It's just she's long and skinny and shallow. She is nicely evenly balanced, but this is just a much lighter body type. I would also say that I think it's important for all sheep to have good body depth, good length. And this is acceptable, but it's on the lighter build side than I would prefer in my flock. But you might see a build like this that might be perfectly healthy and normal on a sheep that really focuses on, say, dairy production. I didn't keep the sheep around long enough to assess her milking performance, but some of her background was more dairy focused. The sheep on the right here has nice depth, pretty good even build. The size of the rump to the size of the shoulders is comparison, but her torso is short. And this year, every year when she is pregnant, those lambs they have nowhere to go but out. She is as wide as she is long sometimes. And these are the ewes that you'll see in late gestation. They'll be dog sitting, they'll be struggling to breathe. They don't have enough room for both lambs and a good rumen and breathing all at the same time. And they definitely suffer a lot more in late gestation. And so, given the choice of the ewe on the right versus the ewe on the left, I'm gonna look for this long limo body, and prioritize that as much as I can. And again, overall proportions, I talked about the thirds and the shoulders and rump being hopefully proportional to each other. The ewe on the left here is very nicely proportioned. She's got a deep body. She's got a good sized shoulder. And when you look at her rump from the top of the kind of hip to the stifle joint, she's at a little bit of an angle. By the way, for conformation, you ideally want to be perfectly perpendicular to the side of the sheep and also down at their level. When you're looking down over from the front to an angle, it can be hard to judge. But ideally what you want is the shoulders match the rump and the body in between. It's the traditional rule of thirds, where if you drew a line behind the shoulder and a line at where the croup stifle start, ideally you'd have a third in the shoulder, a third in the torso, and a third in the rump. I think with sheep, it's better for the middle section to be longer. It should definitely not be shorter. The two sheep on the right, the one on the far right is a very dramatic example of big in front. Actually, it's got a really nice smooth shoulder and then a nice midsection, and then the rear is like it's about half the size that it should be. It's both short lengthwise and short vertically. I would absolutely worry about daughters by a ram like this. Oh, where did this go? I would worry about daughters by a ram like this having potentially undersized pelvises. You're going to get a smaller leg roast. You want to see the junk in the trunk. You want to see the trunk match the shoulders, basically. And then the guy in the middle, he's this is a young lamb, but he's got a much bigger, rump area, and his midsection's decently long, but his shoulders are very small. And so you see how he's actually downhill. He's smaller in the front than he is in the back. The sheep in the middle and the sheep on the right, it's kind of like they were put together by a committee, where they took part of one sheep, part of another sheep, and kind of plugged them together. Um, and you ended up with not good balance. You want to see nice balance. Um, and then here's where we talk about how when we judge conformation, this is the biggest trap that I've fallen into personally, and I had to crawl out of it. And I know a lot of people have gone in a lot of different directions with this of, can you have it both ways? Can you have sheep that look great, that are put together great, that also perform well? And I think it's safe to say probably everybody listening on this call right now has had the experience of the sheep that looks amazing. And every time you look at them, you're just like, oh, I just love that ewe. I just love that ram. I love how they're put together. But you need to deworm them a lot, or their babies just never quite turn out as good as mom or dad, or, the performance just isn't there, or the health isn't there. Um, and then the animals that just keep on ticking and perform every year, and their lids are red all summer, and you just look at them and you're like, well, why do they just look so meh, you know? Um, and I think that some of this just comes from breeding focus. When you focus really hard on a particular appearance of an animal, you're willing to keep an animal that looks great. And if I only have to deworm them, I don't know, once or twice, maybe 3 times a summer, that's okay. Or you just think, well, they're just, something we can work with. And this is, like I said, this is all breeding. All breeding is like this, where you've got something that looks great but doesn't perform well, or vice versa. Um, I do not believe that these are mutually exclusive. I have had animals, and I hope all of you have had at least a few in your flock over the years that had the whole package, that looked good, performed well, and their offspring carried that on and were even better. Um, but so I can tell you it's not mutually exclusive, but it is also hard, and it's hard to keep the consistency. It's hard to get it and keep it. Um, and also this is a learning process, because what looks good, when I think back on when I first got Icelandic sheep, or before I even got them, and I was just going around and looking at photos I could see on the web, and you'd find animals that they looked great, and you think that's what an Icelandic should look like. And then you go shopping, and then you can't quite find ones, maybe especially not within your budget if you're shopping on Craigslist, which is where I started, I'll freely admit. But sometimes you'll find that, well, I can't find anything that looks that good, but I can start with, this is what I can start with. And that's okay. I think there's a lot of value in starting with the sheep that you can, and finding out if you even like them or not, or if you're even into this. Because a lot of people start with sheep, and then 1 or 2 years later, they're just like, this isn't really for me. And that's fine. It's it's what it is. But when you start out, we all have to start with where we are, with what we can afford, with what we can acquire, and it's important to just pay attention to what happens when you breed these animals, and what comes out, and what you decide to keep and continue forth in your flock over time. And what I've always found incredibly useful is to take lots of photos, because I'll look back at photos I took of what I thought was well, it actually probably was my best lamb of the year 5 years ago. And I look at that today and it's like, well, that's really nothing special, because the quality has improved over time. Also, I've gone back and looked at sheep that I didn't know how good I had it at the time, because my eye wasn't as well trained to actually appreciate how remarkably good a particular ewe or ram was, at the time that I got them. Sometimes you just get lucky. But ultimately, if you want to train your eye over time, I can't recommend enough to take lots of notes and take lots of photos. And the problem is trying to keep them organized. When I go back and I look through things, it's like, oh, I know I've got a photo that shows this, and it can be hard to find. But having it and being able to review back and see things, it really helps you learn, because one of my biggest goals is every year, especially this time of year, which is why we decided to schedule this topic for this time of year, is this is when we're all looking at our lambs, and also all the parents, and deciding, well, okay, who's going to stay and who's going to go, and if they go, are they going to go to the freezer? Are they going to go to somebody else's flock? And it's important to try to train your eye and look for things, and see what you can as early as you can. And this is something that, I mean, I could go on and on about, but I really believe that most of the good stuff that you're going to see, you should see it by the time the lamb is a few months old. If you're already seeing problems in performance, whether that's health, whether that's weird conformation, it's probably not going to get better. And if anything, I find that it's going to get worse. I find that a lot of times we kind of mentally Photoshop when we look at our animals, and it's easy to be barn blind or kennel blind, they call it in the dog world. And you just look at this lamb that's your favorite lamb, and then you look at them, and then you're seeing something, but you're kind of mentally whitewashing it. And you're like, no, I think his leg's just a little weird, but I think he'll grow out of it. And it's like, no, he's probably not going to grow out of it. Or if you're already seeing crooked legs, crooked feet, that's not going to get better. And even if there are extraordinary circumstances with nutrition or parasite challenges in young lambs, you have to look at the big picture. And the other thing I'd mention is it's important to look at your total cohort, because every year you're going to have a few lambs that are great. I hope you will. And then you're going to have a bunch of kind of middling lambs. And then you're going to have your bottom 25%. And your bottom 25% should always be cold. Because I don't think any breeder is producing such a high quality flock that their bottom 25% still shouldn't be cold. If you want to be improving the breed and improving your flock. Now, one breeder's bottom 25% might be better than someone else's top 25%. That can actually be a thing. But when you look at the quality of the parents, you want to see your flock moving in a direction of better health. There's always something you can improve. And in the very beginning, you might be just calling out the obvious faults. And as time goes on, you'll get more and more nitpicking, and you'll start seeing, well, this is just really not quite right. This could be better. And why not get the best sheep as possible with as few iffy things that slide through, basically. So this is the end of the prepared content that I've got. I didn't have as much time to do as much as far as content as I wanted, but I wanted to stop here and let's talk about questions. Let me just pull up the chat here and see what's been asked in here. Yeah, Mike, I see you had a question, or you just mentioned the
No, I just
associated.
yeah, that was just a mention. No other real questions were asked.
Nope.
So
I gotcha. Let me also pull up, there was a list of questions that came in with the when folks registered. Let me pull those up and have a look at what was in here. And if you registered really late, by the way, by which I mean like the last few hours, I might not have the most recent questions added in. Actually, you know what? Let me make sure I've got the latest from right at the end. Let me go. Let's see. There we go. This is from a few hours ago, so hopefully it's got everybody's thing. Okay, here's a good one about conformation traits that you could have that might not be passed to offspring. These traits show as the ewe gets older. Robin, I hope you don't mind me calling you out as having submitted that. But
yeah,
can you explain a little bit more about what kind of traits you're thinking of?
Well, so what I have found in a couple of my better ewes that pass along, better offspring is as they get older, their top line sags a little bit. So if I choose, I mean, I'm not going to get rid of them, but if I choose to, because I'm constantly, I have a number that I can keep, and that's it. So I have to figure out who's, being called and who's not. No, and I know that these guys have really good offspring, but to look
Is
at
it a
them,
longevity concern?
they're like 4 or 5 years old, and their top line is kind of sagging, but they're putting out babies that, that are just, they're really nice.
Right. And that's something I've thought of too, because I've done in the last few years a lot of very aggressive replacement of keeping a lot of offspring and cycling out ewes earlier than most people would. The downside of having made that choice is that I don't have a lot of old ewes, and I don't have a lot of assessment of how long should a ewe be, having a good top line, still very productive, still able to produce a good set of twins every year. Do we
And
think,
I'm not,
is 5
when I'm
too
also
young to retire a
saying it,
ewe? Probably. Is
yeah,
a ewe that's
yeah.
still producing great lambs at 10 and still has a pretty, firm toned top line and abdomen? I would say that's remarkable. So somewhere in the middle is like, well, what's good, what's normal, what's an indicator of maybe not a good sign. I've had ewes as
I'm
young
not
as 3
meeting
or 4 already
top
looking very
lines that
saggy.
are dragging on the ground. I'm
Yeah,
just saying, look, it's
more
not
droopy.
as straight or as strong
Yeah,
as it used to be,
yeah,
type of thing.
I would agree. I would. Who have we got on the call that has enough old ewes, 5 to 10 years old? Can you comment on this?
I actually have 2 of them in my
You do?
flock.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And
And so,
I had one ewe
mhm,
that's the mother of the ewe I'm actually talking about. She
mhm.
lambed at 11
Wow, nice.
and pushed out, you know, she did have a single, and I was happy
Hmm.
because she was starting to show her age. But,
Yeah.
you know, she was starting to not, I mean, she had started on around 6, 7. Just
Hmm.
the top line wasn't as straight as it could be. I
Yeah.
know that she wasn't going to go anywhere, but there is that possibility that, if say, hey, I have a 5-year-old, actually, I was thinking of selling my 5-year-old until her yearling ewe passed away.
Hmm.
But she's got gorgeous fleece. She had a straight top line. It's just a little bit behind the shoulders now, dipping.
Hmm.
But her lambs are all like, really top notch. And I'm
Yeah.
like, if
Oh,
somebody looks at me, she's going to look like crap. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
No, I
But
do. I do.
yeah, then I've
And,
got lambs right here to show them this is what
mhm,
she has.
right. Well, and this touches on a few things. One thing really quickly, um, sheep, just like cows, horses, and a bunch of animals, they don't have collarbones. They don't have a fixed skeletal attachment from their shoulders to their torso. It's all just a muscle fascia sling. And so a sheep that's in poorer body condition, which a lot of ewes get this time of year, everybody's looking pretty dragged down and sucked down by their lambs. Most ewes, I just kind of close my eyes. I try not to look at ewe shoulders this time of year because it's just too depressing. Because they all just look kind of slouchy and saggy, and they're all really run down, because they're putting it into their lambs. So that is something to be aware of, is if you're going to be looking at an animal, ideally they should be shorn, and ideally they should be right around a BCS3, or 2.5 to 3.5. A sheep that's very fat, 4+, that fat it's going to sort of, think of it as like spackling over. It fills in all the cracks and bumps, and they just look smooth all over. That doesn't mean they actually have a smooth structure and a good conformation. So that can hide faults. Similarly, when a sheep gets really skinny, it can both expose the truth, and it can also just tell a more exaggerated bad story that's worse than the actual reality involved.
But you're also looking at,
You have to
why
look.
was she skinny,
Right,
type of
exactly.
thing. And that should
Um,
be,
Yeah, and it's true, because one of the sheep that I have, that's she's got a very saggy abdomen. And I would, based on when I look at other sheep in my flock, I would say it's premature. She's been a saggy lady since at least age 3. Um, Whereas when I look at sheep I've had that are 5 and 6 years old and they've still got pretty good muscle tone and structure, I feel like that's telling me something about this particular ewe. Um, and then another big concept that we're sort of dancing around here is, how good does the parent look versus how good do the children look? Because
mhm,
we've
want
all,
to
like I
improve.
said, there's those ewes that look great, but their babies don't. And it's really hard. You have to judge a breeding animal on its offspring. And
Yep.
if its offspring are continually worse than mom or dad, then that's a bad sign that even if they've got the goods, they're not passing them. And also vice versa. I mean, those plain Jane ewes that produce great lambs that grow and do well, you know, it's just like you just sort of want to hide that ewe, so when the people come to look at lambs, they don't see her. But you know, if it's what she's producing. That's her job, is to produce good lambs. And if she's producing good lambs, kind of doesn't matter how bad she looks
Yep.
in a way.
Yep.
And untangling that is so hard because, you know, every time I go out and, you know, look at my sheep, and it's like, oh, I like the way that, I really want to keep that one. Definitely want to keep that
Yeah.
one. And then it's like, oh, that one. No. But then I come home and I make myself look at my data that I keep on eyelids and how many times I've had to deworm them and how many times I've had to help them at lambing time. And I have to force myself to look at the data objectively, because when you look at the animal, it's always subjective. You just think, oh, she's so beautiful, but the performance isn't there. So that's a big thing to look at. And with rams, it's even harder because, well, it's easier in the sense that you can get a lot of offspring in 1 year from one ram, and you can find out very quickly, well, it looks like a lot of that ram's lambs had problems with dystocia. Maybe it was him, not each ewe in question. It takes two to tango. A lot of ram conformation can be a factor in dystocia. And so when I have a ewe that's always been a reliable lammer, has trouble 1 year, I'll look at, okay, what ram was she with and who else did he breed, and how was their lambing experience? You have to try to find these patterns because and you have to have enough data for these patterns. And that's one thing that's really tough if you have fewer than, say, 5 to 10 sheep. It's so hard. You can't find any pattern because every single one is its own single data point. And
Yeah, but
sometimes
I
there's
can
a lot of
still
value
tell.
in doing larger
I can,
numbers so that you can find the
yep.
trends.
Yeah, but I can still tell. It's like all of my lambs this year were so big.
Mm-hmm.
I know it wasn't from the ram because I had lambs last year out of him.
Mm-hmm.
So then I had
So
to
that was
go,
maybe this year's climate, your hay crop,
yeah,
nutrients.
we're narrowing it down to that because I talked
Yeah.
to the guy that I get hay from, and he's like, "Oh, well, I gave you your baleage was all of the
You got it
first
from the
of the
good
first
field, or
cutting.
I just fertilized that field last spring, or yeah,
It
I
was the
mean,
first of the first cutting, so he was
mm,
predicting that it was like 18 to 20% probably protein."
wow. Wow, that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
and we didn't know that, but now that I know that,
Yep.
he'll still give me the same stuff, but I'm gonna have it tested, but we're probably gonna end up doing like the last month, like half bale, like one feeding baleage and the other feeding dry hay to
Mm-hmm.
try to manage that protein level
Yes. Yeah, and
some.
that's one thing that, you know, good nutrition is the foundation for everything, and good management, whatever that needs to be in your environment. You know, if you're in a high parasite environment, you need to really aggressively manage with rotation, possibly look at use of coccidiostats in your young lambs. You know, depending on, you know, if you're in a wetter climate versus drier, um, you do have to try to set them up for success. At the same time, you have to, I find it very useful to always look at the whole lamb crop as a whole, because, you know, this is what they call it, the 80-20 rule of 20% of things cause 80% of the problems. It's like, look at if most of your lambs are doing well, then your outliers should be clear. And you know that those ones are not doing well. And it's easy to just get kind of turned around in circles where you're like, well, that one was born late. But think, why was it born late? Unless you held that ewe back from the ram, did she take a few cycles to catch? Is she possibly showing some deficiencies that the other ewes get bred first cycle right on time, first exposure to the ram, and they had their lambs first in the season? So you know, you have to kind of look at everything. But I do find it very useful to try to keep a tight lambing crop and look at the whole cohort and say, how are most of them doing? Because this year, for reasons that I have not yet identified, all my weights are down across the board. So all I can do is look at, well, I can't compare this year's best growing lamb to last year's best growing lamb, but he of this crop this year is the best growing lamb, and these ones are in the middle, and those ones are lagging behind. Whatever that looks like this year with this year's parasites, rainfall, climate, temperature, and everything that goes with that.
Hey,
And that's
Diane.
another reason why it's good to look at that kind of bottom 25% to cull, is those tell you whatever's weakest this year, whatever the conditions are. Yeah, Mike?
So, looks like that Molly Norman has a question in the
Yeah.
chat.
Oh, thank you for catching that. Oh yeah, about conformation on lambs in fleece. Okay, this is a big problem because especially if I don't know about you all, but I like to try to make the decisions before I shear them, because if I know that I don't want to use this lamb for breeding, I'd prefer that they stay in full fleece and get a nice pelt after harvest, for example. So one thing I do is I think you kind of have to do it both ways. You have to know what good conformation looks like naked, and then you have to start training what I call your X-ray vision of like what, and also your hands are your most important tool. Touch your sheep, feel their shoulders, feel their loins when you're doing body condition score checks. You can feel through full fleece, you can feel if a sheep's got a really narrow loin versus when you have to like stretch your hands and it's full of, what hopefully is muscle, but without ultrasound, you don't really know. You can have fat lambs feel very plump in the loin, but it's fat, not muscle. And that's a very heritable thing. But palpate their loin, feel their shoulders, where their shoulders and neck attachment are. And if you feel, these lumps and dips, just touch all your lambs and feel all of them and feel what it feels like to try to get that, both the X-ray vision and the palpation, sense of what am I feeling here? And I've had sheep where sometimes I was just feeling, I'm thinking, what am I feeling here? Like, what is this? And sometimes it helps to look at their parents, what their parents look like shorn, feel their parents. It's very much an experience thing. But you can also feel through the, you can feel a lot through the fleece. Actually, let me pull up, let me screen share. And actually, let me drop this in chat while I'm looking at this. This is, I think, one of the most useful general sheep conformation guides out there. This is the one I mentioned earlier that's put out by CSBA. I know that I've dropped that link in chat. I'll go to actually share it. There we go. But this is just a really good overview. And most of it applies, except these are all going to be like these commercial meat type sheep. And let me just get down to the part about shoulders. I reread this multiple times a year, by the way, because you learn different things every time. But you look at these comparison photos, and one of my personal goals is to eventually put something like this together with all Icelandic sheep as examples. But look at these not desirable ones in the lower left here with the kind of open scapula and the dip on the sides and both on top, between, you shouldn't be feeling these kind of humps and dips. And so when you're feeling your lambs, you should be able to feel them. And here's where, again, talking about body capacity, with the chest depth. So this is another kind of mental exercise I like to play. It's like, okay, so if you couldn't see the body on this heart girth capacity eval from the front section, if you couldn't see the body, if all you could see was the legs, because the top is all covered with a curtain of wool, glorious lamb fleece, look at the feet. How close are the feet together? Are they wide apart? Are they close? How long is like the wheelbase from front to back? You can start just sort of trying to peek under the covers a little bit and say, well, how wide is the stance of the forelegs, the hind legs? Is it even? Is it a nice, good rectangle? Or, this one on the right, this is a lot of Friday sales ads. This is what the legs look like under the curtain of glorious lamb fleece. They look like it's just right. They're just right together. Which, if they're talking leader lines or we're talking dairy bred sheep, that might be normal for that group, that line. If you're wanting to do carcass meat traits, it needs to look like the ones on the middle or on the left. So that's something you can look at. This also has these great diagrams of the pasterns. You see this, the angle of the pastern matches the front angle of the correctly trimmed hoof. And, when it looks lumpy or kind of knobbly, this is usually a bad sign. And, here, like from the side, you see a lot of this in the really chunky, strong types. You want to see a nice, straight, upright, and also ideally a little thicker, but the examples they show in here usually have heavier bone than Icelandics have. Look at these things with, splaying out or pointing, toeing in. It's just not okay. It's not going to get better. Do make sure that the sheep has correctly trimmed hooves, is on a level, firm surface. When you're judging this, maybe take a few photos. Any sheep can be taking an odd step when you're looking at the moment that you're looking, but if you're, oh, I think I zoomed in too far. If you're seeing this kind of outward splaying or inward turning, it's not a good sign. Now, one thing that can happen in terms of width is I've had lambs that were extremely bulky and they had extremely muscular upper arms, and that gave a visual appearance of like a knock-kneed. But in that case, you have to look at the inside of the leg, because the inside will be straight. And it's just the outside will be like little drumsticks. So if you look at the outer profile, it'll look knock-kneed, but the inside should show straight. But this is all very good stuff that's very applicable to all sheep, regardless of breed. The one thing, I'm going to just zoom ahead, looping back to what I was talking about earlier with the croup. This is where I disagree the most with, well, that's looking at the back, but look at the rear end on this thing is just bizarre. Like, you're not going to see that in an Icelandic. It looks more like a cow. This straight profile here, and here what they're calling extremely strong is A, not to be found in Icelandics, and B, I think a big dystocia risk. I think that what they're calling acceptable is, I think, decent, pretty good, and what they're calling not desirable is, I think, fairly average for an Icelandic ewe. They are just built with a different slope to things. So that's the big part of this document, that every time I share this with somebody, I'm like, don't listen to this part. This part is just completely not applicable to our breed. But most of the other things are very much relevant. It's got great diagrams of good, okay, not okay size. Obviously, there should be 2 testicles. They should be even. I'd like to say this is basic common knowledge, but it's something that I've seen people struggle with. And same thing with udder conformation. You want to see a nice cleft in the middle. You don't want to see a uniboob. You don't want the teats up too high, up under the flank where the lambs can't find them. And if they're too close to the center, they're going to be more prone to getting soiled and having problems with mastitis from like bedding and stuff. Yeah, when they're up too high, lambs can really struggle as well. So yeah, this has tons and tons of great content in it. Oh, I need to go back and look at the registration questions again. There's a question about improving wool quality through genetics. Also, there's some similar questions as well about like what's heritable versus what's not. Most things, as far as body structure, conformation, and everything, are heritable. And when we talk about breeding and selective breeding and choices, you have to, if you can't select for something if you haven't got it in the first place. If every single one of your animals has coarse fleece, you're probably not going to be able to select for fine fleece because you just don't have the genes for it. You have to have it to be able to select for it. So this is where it kind of gets into like purchasing decisions. If you don't have any, if you want trophy horns, for example, if you want big, wide, beautiful, glorious trophy horns, then you need to have animals that can show that, and both ewes and rams need to show that. Same thing with fleece, same thing with muscling. You need to buy genetics in if you don't have any of them in your flock, or if you only have it in like one animal, and that if you focus so much on that, your whole flock would just be then inbred on that one animal, basically. So sometimes you can't get there from here, is what I'm saying. And you have to buy in genetics. But you have to consider where you purchase from, and every purchase is a new opportunity for biosecurity lessons, as I like to say. And it's important to buy from safe sources and ask a lot of questions about the flocks you purchase from. How do they manage their flock? How do they feed them? How, do they take data? Do they measure their lambs? Some people go very much by kind of instinct and feel, and I've seen some amazing breeders produce amazing animals without a single spreadsheet, which blows my mind because I love my spreadsheets so much. But my spreadsheets help keep me honest and keep me on track. But some people just have the mind like a steel trap, and they can just they just have like a knack for instinctively following the traits through their generations of their animals. And so whatever works for you is what matters, and try to identify if your outcomes are going in the right direction. I will say, when it comes to fleece quality, is to beware of the bamboozle. Lambs, almost every lamb has nice fleece. They all feel wonderful and look great. And so it's the yearling year when the truth comes out. Now, that being said, if you breed your yearling ewes, forget about it. They're going to put everything into their lambs and their fleeces. You're not going to get a valid assessment of their fleece quality. But in general, you need to see the yearling fleece to identify if an animal has good fleece or not. Because so many lambs look so nice, and then they grow up and you're like, wow, what happened? Well, that was the adult fleece coming in. In fact, sometimes I've seen issues with, sometimes the really soft, crimpy fleeces actually look worse because they're like VM magnets and they're Velcro. And so some of my lambs that looked especially scruffy ended up, you have to do maybe a lot of processing because we can't coat our sheep. But some of them actually have nicer fiber. But because it's so fine and crimpy, it's a VM magnet and looks like crap. I live in a very rainy climate, and our fleeces, if I don't get them off in time, they get very felted on. And so, the lambs, when I look back at the lambs that looked amazing as lambs that had these like perfect self-shedding cleaning fleeces, they often turned into coarser adults. Was just something that I've kind of anecdotally found. But one thing I can say about conformation and lambs in general is a lot of it's pretty well fixed by 3 months of age. Their angles of their legs, their hips, their croup, their stifles, all the proportions, they're what they are. A short-bodied lamb is not going to suddenly grow longer in the torso. And some sheep will look really short and squatty like corgis, but it's just the leg length, it's their body. That's the thing as well. So generally, skeletal proportions aren't going to change dramatically. The appearance of muscling can vary wildly by condition. I've had lambs that grew slowly but had very muscled config, but then as they got older, if they lost weight, they wouldn't look very muscular. I've never had a lamb that was really, really skinny with no muscling suddenly grow a glorious butt as a yearling or a 2-year-old. It just doesn't really happen. The cells have to be there to grow bigger. And a lot of these muscle cells, they get deposited in late pregnancy in embryological development, where, fleece density, secondary follicles, muscle development. If you don't have good prenatal nutrition, the genes could be there, but you're not going to see it in the phenotype, which is why I say management is so important to really judge this. If you're not feeding your sheep well and having a good balanced mineral ration, and the only way to be sure if that's really working is to test livers occasionally with of your culls. That's the only definitive test to be sure. There are blood tests for nutrients and microminerals, but liver testing is the gold standard, and it's not something we do on living sheep. So there is that. What else? What else is on this list? Oh, I do see a question in chat about where did it go? Should you cull for extra teats? That is not considered a fault in Icelandics, but a lot of people in the dairy goat and dairy sheep world are very against more than two teats. So I think that's something you could choose to do in your flock if you wanted to only have sheep with two teats. But it's not considered a fault or a problem in Icelandics. And because, I mean, that's one thing, our breed standard and definition is so broad because we've got so much genetic variety. I mean, almost the only thing that it even really calls out on our current breed standard published on our website, it's only very specific about things like bite, crooked legs, the fleece should be dual coated. And the rest of it's just kind of hand wavy, to be honest. I mean, there are some size and weight guidelines, but a lot of people do not have ewes or rams that are those weights listed for a lot of reasons. So it ultimately comes down to you've got the gene pool you've got to start with. If you don't have the genes in it to begin with, you need to get them. And then you need to put them together to find out. And that's another thing that comes up a lot is like, should I hold my yearlings, my lambs back until they're yearlings to breed them in order to find out if they're quality or not? I think there's a good value in, especially in a high parasite load environment, it's a good idea to let them finish maturing because if you breed ewes as ewe lambs, it is very hard on them and you need to be really on top of it. But you should be able to have a pretty good idea if a ewe or a ram lamb is breeding quality by the time they're 6 months old. And and it doesn't mean that they're the best Icelandic ewe lamb this year, but they might be the best in your flock. They might be the best of your current gene pool. And so think of it as just in the tech world, we call it rank stacking, where, on every team, it's like there's the top performers, the middle, and the bottom, and they want to cut the bottom every year and just keep whoever's performing at the top level. Does that mean that top level of that team is better than another one? Maybe, maybe not. But within your own group, you can do that. And if I make my butcher appointments a year in advance, and I always book extra slots, and then I try to fill as many as I can. I try to, look for reasons to say, well, that one's just not as great as the next one based on what I'm looking for, what I'm trying to move in that direction, performance, phenotype, everything. It's a lot to think about. And some of us think about it probably too much, to be honest. Let's see, any more questions in here? Cowhawks. So cowhawks is, when we say cowhawk, in fact, I think there may have been a picture of it, or maybe not. But cowhawks refers to the hocks being a little closer in the back and the hind toes pointing out a bit. That's not great, but I don't think cowhawks is a super big problem, to be honest. I think a slight degree of angling out in the hind legs is actually fairly normal. In fact, I'm much more concerned about legs that are too straight or that turn in the back, for a variety of reasons. So, I mean, ideally, every sheep you keep and breed is going to be like as perfect as possible. But the reality is we can only move the needle so far each generation, and you just have to look at what do you have and is it at least acceptable? And can you work with it? Or are there compelling enough traits that you might want to work with a particular animal in your flock and see if you can get their good stuff to the next generation and maybe leave some of the bad stuff behind. And that's all we can do, really. But you do want to have some hard cutoffs. Say, don't ever breed a crypt orchid. Do not ever breed a parrot mouth. These are some hardline things that you'll want to draw the line at, but everything else is kind of negotiable. Like, well, wait and see. See, if this will improve or if that will improve. Because like I said, if I culled every animal that had a single fault in my flock, I'd have like 2 sheep left. I wouldn't have any sheep to breed. Because there's always something. Okay, one question I see, body condition scoring of Icelandics versus other breeds, there's no difference. The technique of body scoring where you feel the flesh cover and there's some really good detailed guides out there where it's like, can you feel between the vertebrae? Can you, how much bone can you feel? Can you curl your fingertips over the edges or not? That's universal to all sheep. I will say though that the loin muscle shape and size is very strongly heritable, as is fat cover, and the only way to truly know is ultrasound. So anybody in Iceland, they're doing this with their station rams. They've even just introduced, South Ram just introduced this last year in the latest ram catalog, a specific breeding value estimate for the loin muscle itself, just the loin, because if any of you who are breeding and selling meat, the lid of the rib rack, that's what you're charging top dollar for, not your leg rump, your leg roast or your shoulder roasts, or everything else. It's that muscle medallion shape that's attached to the ribs, and then a little farther back on the short ribs. The shape and thickness of that muscle and how fatty it is or isn't, that is a direct straight line to price, quality, and happy meat customers. Real quick, Alicia, if you could hold on a sec, there's a question about pasterns rolling in or out. Should we cull for this? I would say ideally, yes. That being said, like I was just saying, everything taken into context, I had an AI offspring last year that had great size, great growth rate, really perfect lids, no deworming all summer. And yet he had some pasterns that I really hated. And every time I looked at him, I just cringed. I did choose to use him on one ewe, and she had really, really good legs. And I'm looking at their lambs very, very carefully and deciding if I can hopefully, again, bring the good stuff through and leave the bad stuff behind. If you have better options, it'd be better to cull, something like that. But you have to look at the whole picture of the animal and who you have available, what kind of genetics you can or can't acquire this year. Things like legs are you just really got to watch them, because you can also get kind of blind to like if all the sheep in your flock have the same kind of not great legs, that just starts looking normal to you. And so it's good to just keep looking at reference photos and look at other sheep and say, well, what's good, what's healthy, and also how does the animal move? Do they walk evenly and smoothly? That's just something to look at. But in a perfect world, yes, I would always cull for that. In the real world, I don't always. Just like everything else, except the hard line culls like parrot mouth. Just no, never. Just don't. That's not something you want to work with or try to salvage. Alicia, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just curious kind of to learn more about what they're doing with the loins. So ironically, I was actually looking at a menu for a restaurant in Iceland yesterday, and I noticed like the one lamb dish that they had was a lamb loin. And I was thinking to myself, like, how the heck do they keep that as their main menu item? Because I feel like, at least for me, like a couple of my lambs will have a really good loin that I'll cut off the saddle roast, but for the most part, like they're not super huge and I just leave them on the saddle roast. And like the handful that I do, I'm like, I just ate one the other day and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so delicious.
Yeah.
But like they're not super big. So I want to know how to get bigger loins on my lambs. And I'm really curious, like
specifically loins. So this is if you specifically want to improve loin muscle quality, you should look at high AI percentage sheep coming out of AI programs and or get into AI yourself, because that's just so heritable. I know, but I can tell you that comes at a cost. I have had AI offspring with really crabby legs. The parasite resistance is a complete unknown. It might be good, it might be bad, it might be ugly. The one thing you can guarantee if you're using high IA percent offspring is that you'll probably have better muscling in specifically the loin itself. But let me share this though briefly. This is something I forget where I couldn't find out where it was on the website, but this is somewhere on one of the Icelandic websites. But this is just a diagram showing this is referring to the muscle. This is where they measure it, and then they measure the fat. And this is an example right here on the right of a not very good.
Look at that.
Like look at all that fat. That is not a nice chop.
There's like
That's
no
not a
loin
nice.
there.
Right. That's just a big slab of, that's a bunch of trim that's going to be wasted, basically. And it's probably going to be gristly and not very nice.
I mean, I
And
put
then,
that in my grind, but
yeah, and then this is just describing the scoring of the loin score shape. This is a good 4 to 5, and here's a score of 1 to 2. And this is something you have to use ultrasound to see.
wow, crazy.
And this is something that here, let me stop this and then I'll pull up the Prudescrow, the RAM catalog, because that in particular is, I gotta find the newest one because they just uh, updated this. It's the 2024 one. They just came out with this new special score just for loin muscle. And so let's just get down to get to one of the RAMs. There's all kinds of stuff in here. And you can run all this through Google Translate and you can learn quite a lot. But here you go. Here is a shape. And this one right here, the OMV score, this refers to that muscle, the loin muscle.
Okay.
And then the one right after it, feta, means fat. And see right here, this section refers to the judged offspring of this ram. So
Okay.
the lambs sired by him in 2023. This was the ultrasound measurement in millimeters, and this is the fat measurement in millimeters of his offspring that were judged and ultrasounded.
Wow.
And these numbers down here at the very bottom are his own as a lamb muscle thickness and fat thickness measurements. 34 millimeters muscle, 33.2. They use a comma instead of a decimal to mean that in most European systems.
Yes. Yeah.
And so looking at these scores, and especially if they have judged offspring, this is what's going to translate into this this score here. And the way this is what's called the bloop, by the way. And I could do an entire presentation just on the Prudescrow and all its statistics because it's just amazing. But the way the system works is that 100 is the mean, and every 10 points above that is one standard deviation. So
Okay.
when it's and this is what it refers to is how improved will this be in the offspring. This means that if he's got 101, this means his offspring are just going to be neither improved nor degraded in terms of fattiness score.
Okay.
And a good high fat score means leaner. It means less fat. A good muscle score means more thick muscle. And so this here means he's 2.5 standard deviations of estimated improvement of his offspring having improved loin muscle thickness over their dams, depending on what their dams are bringing to the table. And so
this is so cool.
Yeah, almost all of the data in here, it's all focused on big production meat flocks. But when you do AI, you get muscling, but you're going to probably go down in fleece. You're possibly going to go down in other things about health and performance, about will these genes work well in North America.
Yeah.
But yes, you'll get these AI lambs and you'll feel their loins and it'll be like, oh, plump, and you're just like, oh, I can't wait for those chops. I know, it's just kind of creepy, right?
You might have convinced me that I might need to go down this road someday, because I I'm not
F1, F2,
I'm not doing fleece or
someone
dairy at
else's
all.
bread and already rolled the dice for you. So
yeah.
But it matters hugely because heritability of loin muscle is extremely heritable. It is one of the most heritable traits, and they're focusing on it, I would almost say, too hard in Iceland. But again, their goal is to be a chop factory.
Yeah, and again, I was really surprised to see that lamb loin was the only dish on this menu that I was randomly looking at yesterday. And it just kind of surprised me. And again, mine haven't been terrible, and occasionally, like I say, I get one that's good enough that I'm like, ooh, I'm going to cut that up and cook it separate. But yeah, fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. I was also going
to being at high elevation in Colorado, parasites are not as big of an issue for me.
You're in a real sweet spot. That means that you could have much better success with F1 type offspring in that ecosystem than I will down in my swampy barber pole liverflick paradise, even though it's green and lush and people look at my pastures like, wow. And I'm like, yeah, it's a
I was gonna say
death zone.
that's my problem is all of my pastures right now are brown and dry, and I'm really glad it was raining a little bit today.
For sure. Earlier, someone was asking, Molly, you were asking about evaluating lambs through fleece.
Yeah.
So
Oh, no.
Look at this guy. Look at this guy. You see this shadow? It's like you took a cinch and tightened it right behind his shoulders. That's, if you can see that through the fleece, I don't even want to know what this guy looks like naked. I mean, that's, now he is in here because he has some special genetics regarding scrapie resistance.
Oh, okay. He's not your scrapie guy though.
No, mine, I actually I was really happy with the one we imported last year.
Good.
But yeah, I mean, this is the thing, you look through this and it's kind of amazing where, you know, when we talk about conformation, I remember when I first got into Icelandics looking at this and just thinking like, whoa, look at all these dreamy rams. They're all like, wow, I don't have anything that looks like that in my past. I haven't seen anything like that. But like this guy, I'd say this looks like a very, very nice top line. It just looks like a loaf, like a slab there. That's probably a pretty good top line. But you know, little Frosty here is like, oh man, what is this? This is this is not good. You can see a lot once you start you gotta kind of train your eyes. What else is in here?
Yeah, it's definitely training the eye because I had my one ewe lamb that I still have that from last year. I thought she was dumb. I mean, just not that great. And Kimberly's like, no, she's great. Like, I'll trade you. I was like, oh, okay, I love her now.
Well, and that's the thing to look at is like, and especially with the root sprout, all you get is fleece pictures. They don't have any shorn photos.
That one looks like a baby.
This one, he's actually not.
I know, because his horns, but he looks like a little baby.
Oh, he must be polled.
That's yours, right?
He's polled, actually. Yeah. But and sometimes some of these you can't even like the ram that sired my F1 that had the terrible legs. His photo was like, yeah, you couldn't even see his feet. They were in the grass. And it's like, yeah, now I'm kind of wondering why. Maybe if I actually could see a picture of what his legs look like, that might have shown something. But yeah, it's kind of hard to look at. Like, okay, this guy looks like he's short in the torso. You see that? Like, just like you kind of wonder, did that photo get distorted or something, or is he a short bus? He might be a short bus. Yeah, you can do a whole thing, but you know, the important thing to remember is every ram that's in this catalog, there's a reason, and the reason might not be good conformation. It might be a particular gene or a single trait. Like you see how these guys' scores are like one's bad and then this one's really good and the others are kind of in the middle. Or you'll see rams that are where everything's really kind of balanced. And now this is a pelt fur ram, so no conformation thing here. Oh, this is important to point out about leader sheep. Leader sheep
I want to learn more about that.
They're only judged on performance. I'm sorry, on personality traits and leading behaviors. They are,
makes sense.
I mean, yes, as all sheep, they should have good teeth, good legs, whatever. But look at this guy's legs. You see they're like right next to each other. So even all you see is just a blob of fleece, but the legs are just right here. So this guy's going to be narrow, which is common with leaders. This guy is kind of a freak. He's tall, he's got a deep body, but he's really short. But again, leaders are not selected on conformation or performance. They're selected only on the behavioral traits that make leadership do leading things.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, when you look at on every Friday, like the lambs posted, look at the legs, look at the feet. I'd say this guy looks like he might be towed in a little bit in the back, and his fronts are just like right next to each other. Yeah. So you can start to see it, but you got to just look at a lot of pictures. You just look at a lot of pictures and, you know, see what you can infer from them. And then, but in your own flock, look at that. And then after shearing the ones you decide you're going to shear and get more information on, then you'll find out, well, you know, I've shorn lambs and then just thought, wow, I wish I left that fleece on. But yeah, just keep working on your eye. You can see the chest width here. This is what I was talking about with the drumstick legs.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I do think he's a
Oh,
little
yeah.
bit knock-kneed here because it's also in the middle, but then there's these kind of big drumstick wings on the outside.
He sort of looks like he's taking a step, though.
And then that's the thing. I mean, uneven ground, taking a step, it's good to take lots of photos and compare lots of photos. Okay, look at this guy's feet. It's like relative to the whole size of him, you've got a nice width here and you've got a nice length there. And then the one in the back, this is like perfect rectangular legs
Yeah.
here. So this guy's a long, wide rectangle. So that's a good thing if that's what you're going for. But ultimately it comes down to, well, and then what do his stats and numbers mean and what are they going to do? 38, that's a 38 millimeter loin muscle. That is huge.
He's cute.
We'll say maybe I need that guy.
Right.
I'll say one thing, like, because I was trying to learn more confirmation about my flock, and so I tried to hold their heads and take pictures, and I just think that's not the way to go because they were just fighting me and leaning into me, and like, I think just getting pictures out when they're just out and about is better.
Yeah, every time I've tried like taking a photo of a sheep,
Yeah.
like having someone hold it, unless you like get into the whole sheep sitting showing thing of standing them up a certain way, which means basically training them, and I don't have time for that. I don't know if you all do, but I don't. It's better to find them naturally in the environment, except I can say if their head is down, their shoulders and back are going to look weird.
Yeah, that too. So I've been like trying to whistle or something so they raise their head and then
yeah, exactly. Do the little, snap, or get them to look at something. Yeah, ideally, if you can get photos of them standing up with head up, hopefully looking at something, hopefully straight from the side, not looking down or up.
Yesterday I was trying to take
it's hard.
picture my best ewe lamb this year, and I haven't really handled them very much, and I can't decide if I'm either going to keep her or sell her. She's definitely, like you say, the 1% of my little flock.
Right.
Ever. And she kept like trying to come up to me. And I was like, okay, well, this is good that, good personality is coming out here, but no, just stand over there.
Yeah.
It's
like you can't bring trees out.
It is hard. It's very hard to get good photos of them. It is. Honestly, I live for my telephoto lens because if I need to get close enough to get a decent picture with my cell phone, they're either coming at me or running away.
Yeah,
one or the other. Whereas like I can like spy on them with my telephoto and be like,
you reminded me, from your photos, you reminded me I have one of those lenses. I've never used it. Came with my DSLR and I always used a short one. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was having so much fun from far away and stuff. I was like, finally.
It helps. Well, and actually I do think it helps from a photo perspective. I think it helps to be farther away zoomed in because you get less distortion.
Yeah.
Okay. Because this is, I just reminded me of yet another, like I said, there's just so much we could get into. Someone was posting photos and they felt like every photo of their sheep looked narrow. All the front, everything just looked too skinny. And she had an iPhone and it had like a slimming setting.
Like no.
Because because we all like to look a little slimmer in the photo. And so yeah, it was slimming her sheep.
I didn't even know that's a thing. That's hilarious.
It is a thing because she'd look at the photo and then she'd like look at the animal and be like, how is this happening? It can be the photography. So yeah, yet another bizarre thing to know about. I'm just checking over the list of questions to see if there's something. There were some questions about horns, and honestly, horns could be its own seminar, but horns are extremely sensitive to nutrition and luck and just genetic, or just everything has to go right. You have to have a sheep with the right genetics for nice wide horn sets. And then that sheep has to like never got its horn stuck in the fence, never headbutt other sheep and get one going wonky in another direction. Always have perfect nutrition with no gaps or ever getting sick ever. And then maybe have a like nice, perfect set of horns that hopefully they won't then break off. But that being said, when I think about general, like, kind of like all these traits, a lot of things that are multifactorial. They're not just like you have a white sheep or a black sheep or a brown sheep. There are like dozens of interrelated genes involved. I sort of think of it as if you try to get the maximum level of what I'd kind of hand wavy, vaguely call homozygosity, meaning all of your sheep have pretty good muscling, or all your sheep have pretty good fleece or pretty good horns, that's going to load the dice so that you're going to be more likely to have lambs that also have good muscling or good fleece or good horns. When I look at a lamb with tight horns, it's usually like, oh, there's grandma's horns I've been trying to get rid of for like 2 generations. And they still keep coming through every time. You can't just rely on the nice trophy horn ram to fix all your babies. You might fix this year's crop, but they still have mom's crappy horn genes. And their babies could like 50-50. They could get grandpas or grandmas. And ideally, if something really matters to you, horns, milk, fleece, muscles, every lamb, all 4 of their grandparents should be pretty good on that thing. But that's also what we do, where we try to cancel out the bad things and try to concentrate the good ones. But you can end up with everybody having a recessive copy of bad fleece, bad muscle, bad confo, bad horns, and they'll just keep popping up. And that's why we call the bottom 25%, maybe 50% even, depending on how hard you're trying to push. But we all need to keep sheep for next year. And sometimes the best half of the lamb crop this year isn't even that great, but it's like, well, but that's what I'm going to focus on trying to improve. But yeah, it's all kind of ties together. What else? Is there any other questions? That I think I've got everything from the meeting registration list. Oh, hang on, I missed one about hernias. Can hernias be genetic and passed from ram to lambs? Absolutely. But also from dam. It can also be just situational. There could just be an injury, especially if you had to pull the lamb, you could have created a hernia while pulling it. But in general, anything like that, obviously don't breed an animal that shows it themselves. That's the number one reason I say that. Because if they're showing it and it's a combination of recessive factors, then they probably have homozygous recessive for that bad thing. So, but if you see a pattern, if you use a ram, you bring a new ram in and you see, what once is a happenstance, 2 is coincidence, 3 is enemy action. If you see like multiple lambs with a problem sired by the same ram, it's probably him. It's probably something genetic, which is why we just keep track of it and keep culling. Which is why I don't wait until they're yearlings. If I see a ram lamb that looks promising, the sooner I can find out that his offspring are good or bad, or inherit good things or bad things, I'd like to know sooner. His final adult size, his final horn set, that's going to change over time. But if everything looks good as a lamb, go for it. You'll find out sooner or later, and why not sooner? See, copper deficiency affecting conformation. Yes, copper deficiency can cause swayback in lambs, for sure. That's been well documented. That being said, a lot of people push a lot of copper use in Icelandics to really kind of dangerous levels. And the only way to properly assess your copper program is by testing livers post-mortem on your culls. And so, a lot of people use goat minerals, a lot of people use copper boluses. A lot of it's kind of playing with fire, and you don't really know unless you're testing livers, because there's copper, but it can be affected by other levels like molybdenum. Certain things can prevent copper toxicity or help mitigate it. You don't really know how much, like you can read your labels on your feed as well as your minerals, but you won't know how that's actually like the net result of everything until you do some liver tests on some culls. So yeah, watch out for copper. They need copper, but I think copper deficiency is not as common as a lot of people think. And I think a lot of people are giving levels of copper that are maybe going to bite you if something else happens. Alicia, you got another question?
Yeah, I have a question about testing livers. So
Yeah.
I've had one liver tested once. It was a sheep that I lost unexpectedly that we
Mhm.
like sent a whole bunch of things in for testing.
Mhm.
And he actually came back as copper deficient. I
Mhm.
do recognize that I'm in an area where there's like really high iron in the soil
Mhm.
and
Oh yeah, that
molybdenum,
can
and
block.
so like copper absorption is an issue.
Yes.
So it's the kind of thing that I've tried to be aware of. But I did not send a fresh liver sample in last fall. I still have some in the freezer. Can
Yeah,
I send in frozen, or do I have to wait until
absolutely.
I harvest this year?
No, you can absolutely send it in. I
Yeah,
mean,
even
that's
though it's been
usually
frozen.
I usually send them in frozen with a cold pack, and
Okay.
preferably not in the middle of a heat wave for the benefit of the lab folks on the other end. But yeah, you can absolutely test frozen ones. They only need like 50 grams. I mean, so if you like to also eat it, you can just
Yeah.
cut a little chunk off, freeze that, and send it. The
Okay.
only caution I'd have there is, well, were the minerals you were using that produced the lambs whose livers you'd be sending in, is that still relevant to what you're doing today?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if it is, then you'll get hopefully good results. But because it's like a lag time, it's like, well, how were they used in pregnancy plus the lambs? How did they grow all summer? And it's important to test healthy animals that are representative, hopefully, of like your average
Yeah.
population. Because if you only send the sick ones in, certain illnesses and conditions, whatever killed them, could have also been part of why those values were wonky.
Totally.
Um, and
Yeah. And
so, yeah, that's
like,
why it's so important to sample the healthy ones, and even like one or two, hopefully. The problem is liver testing can get pretty spendy, depending on which labs you send it to. It can be like it's often like about 70-80 bucks a sample.
oh, okay.
Um, so it's like it's not something I'm not going to send in more. I just like one or two. Like I try to send one adult and one or two lambs that I feel were like middle of the pack,
Okay.
hopefully somewhere in the average of what I butchered that year, and say, hopefully that's a good example of where my minerals are at.
Okay.
Um,
Great.
but yeah, having that feedback loop is so important because you've got soil, you've got water, you've got forage that you grow on your property, you've got forage that you buy, you've got the minerals you add to all that interact. And like trying to predict forward based on like soil, pasture, whatever forage testing, like I don't know how you'd ever actually approximate what's going to actually happen in the living animal, but doing the liver test is like that's the bottom line. That was your net inputs, outputs, competition, canceling each other out, all those, everything. Um, I think the liver test is the best place to start. And if something really weird comes up, then maybe you could start working backwards. Like probably the next thing I would test is your water. Um, and then also looking at what minerals you provide. And also noting copper oxide wire particle boluses. We know them, we love them. They help so much, but
So
they do absorb copper from them.
tell,
Some people have an
so
idea that they don't absorb a lot, but they can.
So copper boluses are something that like I tried to look into just at like my local farm store once, and
Mhm.
I like they didn't know anything.
Yeah, you won't really find them locally usually. They're more of an online order sort of thing. Like Santa Cruz has some decent ones. Um,
So okay, so Santa Cruz,
they have like a 2 gram and a 4 gram.
You can get them on
Uh,
Chewy.
oh yeah, that's true. You can buy them for
That's
Chewy.
where I get mine.
Yeah. Well, and some folks they buy like the cow-sized ones just for the volume and the bulk, and then they repackage them with a little gel capsule filler into smaller ones. I mean, it's your money or your
and
time.
then you basically just like shove it down their throat.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Get
if
it
you
done.
haven't,
Don't do it with your finger.
yes, I was just gonna say that. If you've not yet worked with boluses, there's a
I have not yet.
reason that, and get a metal one, because those molars back there are like chomping razor
Sharp.
wood chippers. I mean, they are. Yeah, you do not want your fingers in the business end of some lamb molars. You will scream.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you
So
want to
you
get
should,
it and get it down past their teeth.
we use them more for like you don't really have parasites as bad, but for like I'm in the Midwest, so it's more of a parasite thing. But one thing I don't know if you do this, but I collect rainwater for them to drink because my water has sulfur, which affects their copper absorption.
Oh wow.
Also,
Okay.
sulfur interferes with selenium as well.
Yeah, selenium
Yeah.
as well. So I mean, if they're in a pasture that I can't collect water, they get it. But for probably 75% of the summer, they're on rainwater collection system.
Yeah. But it'd be good to test that too as their primary water source. If you had weird results show up on a liver panel.
Yeah. I haven't. We only had female sheep this year, so.
Well, you know,
I unfortunately
I'm gonna say
cancel
something
my
that you're
butcher
not.
date.
I'm gonna say something that you're not gonna like, but
No. But I'm growing. I'm growing. I went from.
I understand. You're expanding your flock.
2
That
sheep
kind of
to 4.
doesn't apply. But I'm just gonna say that yes, we cull males much more stringently,
Yes.
but it's still important to cull females.
I promise I will. I just need.
But I know when I was
to grow
starting out,
first.
I could hardly find ewes. I hardly got any ewe lambs born. It was like it took me the longest time to get enough ewes that I felt ready to cull any of them, just because I couldn't breed or buy them. They just
Yeah.
weren't around. And you need enough to make your lambs every year. So I get that. But once you've gotten adequate numbers of ewes,
Next year.
they need to be getting culled too. Maybe not as strictly as the rams. We put a much heavier burden on them, which is not fair, but it's appropriate. But yeah, ewes also, there's lots of reasons to cull ewes, and many of them have to do with mothering. Or lack thereof.
Yeah, I guess I have a question about culling ewe lambs. So I had 2 single ewe lambs this year. One is like amazing, and yeah, she's like my top 1%, just totally blows everybody else out of the park.
Star lamb of the year, of course.
Yeah, and then the other one, she's okay, but she's also like, she's got some lineage that I really want to hold on to. So like, it's not that she's anything special, just that I want to try keeping that lineage going.
Yeah, that's a valid reason.
And then the other 2 are twin. They both have a twin brother, and they're both like, neither of them are. Yeah, they just like, they don't jump out at me as being like, there's nothing wrong with them, but they also like, they don't have big hip roasts, and they don't, and I'm kind of like, I'm very small, I'm very new, and I've had some folks reach out to me. I think Rosemary keeps sending people my way. I'm not entirely sure why. She has a lot of faith in me. I don't like they're still very new at all of this. But I'm like, I'm really unsure as to whether or not I should offer them to folks who are looking for ewe lambs in my area, because again, like, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're not great. And so I'm kind of torn between like, well, do I just put them in my freezer, or do I offer them to these folks that have reached out to me?
Well, I mean,
I had the same thing. I'm trading one because I don't feel comfortable doing that. Like selling.
Trading is a great way to kind of, especially if you're not sure. One thing I do think about a lot with twins, almost anytime I have any twin set, especially same-sex twins, there's almost always going to be a difference. There's one's going to be better than the other. One's going to have better growth, better, darker lids. There'll be some difference. You almost never get like a perfectly matched set. And so that's one of my most convenient, just arbitrary, where it's like, whichever one's stronger, that's the one I'll consider keeping. Whichever one's weaker, I will almost always cull, just because it's a duplication. Now, again, does that mean that they're bad or inadequate or not good enough? Maybe they'd be great for someone else's flock. Maybe, maybe not. You don't know. And the thing with ewe lambs is you don't know how they're going to turn out until you keep them and breed them, which is part of my decision factor in I breed most of my ewe lambs. If I'm going to keep them, I'm going to expose them at least and see if they breed and how they do. And if they don't, I'll have a few open ewe lambs yearlings in the next spring, and I'll look at them and think, again, if I'm not really feeling like wow, and by the time I've got the next year's crop on the ground, and I know if I've got a lot of ewes or rams that year, I might look at last year's now yearlings and think, I think she could go, she could stay, she could go, or you can, as long as I think part of why I focus so much on defects here is to say, first, obviously, I would say obviously, except it kind of isn't obvious. Obviously, first, screen for defects, bad legs, bad teeth, bad bite, things like that. And at the most minimal level, just make sure that all of those are going to go to the freezer. And if you have to overwinter them to get big enough to put in the freezer, then you do. But you know, that's the first do no harm of sheep breeding, is don't pass on defects.
Right.
Same thing with if those ewes mom rejected her or was a kind of crappy mom, the chance that she's going to repeat mom's performance is higher. And so that might be another reason to maybe not. Because you won't find out until the ewe's bred, which might not be even till a year later if you sell them as a ewe lamb. They may or may not do well. And also then price them accordingly. If you don't know, like if you haven't, when you've worked a ewe line for years and generations, and like this ewe line's just been like worth its weight in gold, and you'd keep every sister and daughter and granddaughter forever if you could, except takes off your flock. Those are the ones that I feel much more confident about selling. And the others are like, I don't know about this one. Her grandma was a little weird, and I'm kind of working this line. This one may turn out okay, or it may not. And I don't think there's anything wrong with selling an average good enough sheep.
Okay.
You know, if they've been healthy, if they haven't needed a lot of crutches and supports to get through summer. But when you're in a drier, lower parasite load environment, think very hard about whether you would sell that animal to a higher load, higher challenge environment. You don't know
Fortunately,
how
it's
they'll do.
only been people in my region that have reached out. That's
there you go.
helpful.
Right.
And definitely, like, it's the kind of thing where, you know, like, I wouldn't want to keep them and breed them because they don't necessarily have the meat conformation that I'm like, really, I'm only trying to keep my freezer full.
Right. Right.
And so, you know,
and these might be nice fleece, but you can tell already that they're little narrow chests and their legs that are 2 inches apart in front. You know, it's not going to get any better. So, but
exactly.
Does she have value in other ways? Does she have good fleece or other good attributes that she might be a welcome addition to someone else's flock? Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. That's good for me to know. Yeah.
The most important thing is don't pass on bad stuff.
Okay.
Average stuff, well, you don't really know.
Okay.
And you kind of don't know until you try.
Okay.
So, you know, regardless of what you, and this is kind of an important thing for people to realize, regardless of what you paid for the parents, if you don't have a lot of good performance data and know how these lambs are performing, you can't just turn around and say, well, I paid 800 each for the parents, therefore each lamb is worth 800 each.
Oh yeah. No.
You know, we call those pyramid schemes. In fact, it doesn't work that way. So, you know, the less you know and can predict about the future success of an animal, the lower it should be priced. And if that just means she goes into someone else's flock to try out versus your freezer, then she's kind of meat value pricing. And you think, well, what would she be worth to me frozen versus what could she do for someone else's flock? That's fair. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Okay. I think a lot of people get really hung up on like only the very, 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 very best of everything. But most things actually just aren't the very best of everything.
Okay, cool. That was helpful. Thank you. And I guess that brought up one more question for me in terms of, you were talking about the twins, always like there's always one that's going to be better than the others.
It's always the weaker twin, yeah.
So one of the ram twins has like his horns are like fraying.
They kind of shelly horn quality.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. It's almost like, and I can't tell if he's been like rubbing them on something, but they're like fraying.
Yeah. Well, is it just the very tips that were either his horn buds at birth or shortly after birth?
Because no, I mean it's like halfway down his horns, and I just noticed the other day.
Okay, because this is something I look at with horns as much as I look at width and everything else. The quality of the keratin. Again, can be nutritional, can be very sensitive to minerals. You can get a thing just like lamb fleeces where the newborn coat, the newborn horn buds that they were born with and their newborn fleece that they're born with is just so soft and tender sometimes that it often, just wears off and kind of debrides away as the lamb gets older, 2, 3, 4 months old. That's a thing. Sometimes the horn buds have like little hairs stuck to them, and then as it grows out, there's this hair is still stuck to the tip of the horn, but those eventually wear off. They kind of polish off.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Here,
but
Diane,
if you're still seeing new growth, it looks kind of shelly and not nice, then that can also be a bad sign. That I would also look at his hooves and say, okay, how is his keratin quality overall? Because I've seen, when you see really good, nice quality horn And keratin production, you'll see it in the feet and you'll see it in the horns equally.
Okay. I mean, and he's going in the freezer either way. It just kind of like it made
You're
me
like, what is this?
Yeah. So I just sent you a photo of it.
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up. Yeah, I see what you're talking about. That is kind of
weird.
I want to see it.
Do you mind if I share? I can share
go
it.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't love it, but it's, I wouldn't say, I mean, I wouldn't, if I liked everything else about this Ram Lamb, I wouldn't cull him for that.
I mean,
but you see, yeah, I see how kind of frayed and wearing this is.
Yeah.
And rough. I'd love to know what his liver panel looks like. That's what I'd say.
I will specifically send in his liver this fall then.
Yeah. But that is a thing about the about horns in general, is there are some horn types. In fact, they call it it's in the Frutiskral. They'll call them fine horned or crap horned. It's actually, that's the actual word for it. And there's like extra craggy horns, and then there are smoother, finer, more refined horns.
I mean, that makes sense.
And here, let me reshare that window. The reason I'm not just sharing my whole screen is because I have like a million windows of all over the place, because I'm really like a tab hoarder.
You and me both.
Here's so like this guy in particular has, see this word finhinder? That means fine horned, and he's got like particularly nice quality. Of course, the pixels and the quality of this photo is really bad, but you just see how beautifully formed it is.
Yeah.
And then you'll find the hang on, I gotta find it. Who's one that I know has the crap? And I'm saying crap, but you'll see it's so the crap hernder, which I believe it means horse, but it also, I just sort of think of it as it means exactly what it sounds like, crap horns. When you see the crap hernder, they are much rougher. They're much more coarse. They're much more like the ridges are deeper and craggier. I find that these are more prone to fly strike, for one, if you're in a wet area.
Really weird.
Yeah, and this one's a leader, so all bets are off. But yeah, this guy again is with the belt around his waist. He's also got these really rough, craggy horns. It's a thing. It's like there's.
Well, and now that I think about it, so my main ram has like very ridged horns, so like similar to that.
Yeah, in fact, this is the 2023 one.
That would have been his sire this year.
Oh, hang on, this is just the one. Let me actually just pull up the whole thing. There's the different rams. Sometimes they'll talk more about it, and sometimes they'll talk less. Yeah, like look at this guy. Look how, especially for a black sheep, look how pale and rough they are.
Oh yeah.
Versus, this one again, very heavy, very thick, very rugged, very ridgy.
That's what my rams like.
Yeah. Like look at this. You can even just see like the difference in the growth. You can just see, of course, even pixelated, you can just see that.
Yeah.
Whereas when you search for the fine ones, you'll just and fine ones can still be thick, but they will like you can just tell that's more smooth and even. It's less craggy. That's a thing.
Okay.
Which again, is it, now this one I'm not sure. Oh. No, I was gonna say, why is it saying he's fine? But actually it's also saying crap.
So it's both?
Yeah, no, it's I forget exactly how that means, but he's not fine. Okay, this guy's definitely 300. That's like smooth and pretty, and like they look like somebody like buffed them and polished them with coconut oil before the photo was taken. I don't like his legs though. You see his pasterns, and his knees are kind of bending.
This is great just for seeing, because immediately I was like, oh, his legs are horrible.
I know, you're like, what the heck? No, it's true. And you just look at this and you're like, and this is actually my little game I play. Every time I open every time it comes out, it's like, okay, what's the deal? It's like you look at these guys and you sort of think, okay, what's this guy's story? Why is he in here? Because some of them you look at and you're like, oh my God, why would anybody? And then you like look at the numbers and you look at the stats and you go, oh yeah, oh, that's why. That daughter fertility and the milkiness, that's why. Those numbers are very good for that metric. You don't normally see 120s.
Do you have to sign up for this to
No, this is on the you can just search for yeah.
I know I've looked at it.
It's out there. Although some of the links that'll show up are like, this is like an older website. This isn't the one you want. You want the this one with the newer logo. This is the site. Yeah, this is the better current site that you can see. Let me drop that in the chat.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
I was trying to find it.
Much appreciated.
Yeah. And oh, and one thing you can do, by the way, you can, so when you go to like translate, sorry, you can go to Google Translate Icelandic to English. So if you just search like this and you get to this little page here where you can just put in text, but this is limited to just like little blobs of like a paragraph or so at a time. But you see this link here, more translation tools. You go here and you can do image OCR, you can do documents, you can feed a whole PDF into here and it'll translate up to a certain size limit, the whole thing.
Cool.
This was like, oh, okay, this is really cool. So like, yeah, you can just, my favorite actually is the screenshot one where it's like, or to the image where you can just say, I'm just going to grab that whole thing and I'm going to just pop it into images. And I'm just going to paste it from my screenshot that I just took. And you can also show original and see them side by side.
Okay, that's cool.
This is like, oh, and then you can copy all the text out. Like, wow.
I haven't used this since college. It's vastly improved.
It really has. It really has. And of course it's kind of hilarious and things that get translated. Apparently he's got a short cat. Whatever that means. It means something.
Probably cat.
But yeah, you can. It's the cup length is the torso. I know that. Eventually you get like a whole file of little. I think this means this, or I think this means that. Yeah, some of these things get really weirdly translated, but there's a lot in here that you can, and what's really important to know about these is that the first few pages before I always just used to like fast forward to just get me to the RAMs. I want to see the pictures, but before there's actually some articles and there's like decoder ring explanations of like, what do these things mean? How do they generate some of these scores? And then at the end, there's usually some article or two about some particularly interesting or relevant topic. Like this right here is an article about bogkrepa, which is that's one of the congenital inherited diseases that causes bow legs and other problems. And you know, this is how I was finding out about. They know that this guy had it and has spread it, and they're trying to test for DNA, and like you can learn a lot. This is their newsletter basically for some of this stuff. There's a ton of information. And then there's like stuff about, you know, this is the new stuff about the new scrapie genotype color coding with got these little indicator flags of, you know, what they mean and, you know, all that. It's a lot of good stuff in here if you like translating and reading and finding out how the sausage is made, so to speak. But yeah, that's the thing too, is there's so little data, or they have so much data in these kind of tools that I remember at first just thinking like, why can't I see shorn pictures? Like, why do they just show us this one crappy pixelated photo of a ram? I can't even see his feet, you know, like what the heck?
Because they give us data.
But this data means a lot more. And yet, like, look at this guy. Pop quiz. What do you think about this guy's top line and shoulders? Okay, first, take your hand
I
and
guess I've
cover
never
those
seen
glorious
something
horns
that
because you need to
fleece, so
ignore those beautiful horns. Like, pretend those don't exist. Pretend that you don't
yeah,
see
his
that.
horns really throw.
Because they just draw the eye and then you forget about the rest of the guy. But like, look at this
Okay.
kind of shape.
That's not just he's got like a lion's mane. That's like
Well, he kind of also does, and he looks like he's got last year's fleece still stuck on in a few bits. See this felty bits?
yeah,
you
he
know?
looks like I've never seen a sheep with that much fleece. Like it looks like they didn't shave it.
It looks like he didn't fully cleanly rue off, or he didn't get shorn in spring, so the next fall he'd got some stuck on stuff. And the whole thing, you just kind of look at it and you just kind of go, wow. But then you look closer and it's like, well, is it though? Is it really wow? Or what's with this top line? Is it has he got the cinched in rib cage, or has he just got super bulky, powerful shoulders? It's interesting. You just see different things. And you, like I said, you just kind of have to use your X-ray vision. This guy, definitely a dip in the
Slope,
middle
yeah.
of the back.
Got cute.
But you know, this guy looks, I mean, they look a little more uphill in front, and that's okay if there's not too much of a dip in the middle. That could just be more powerful neck and shoulders, which a lot of rams have. This guy, again, the light, I see good chest width. I see good length. I don't like how much shadow I'm seeing behind his shoulder. That could be, you know, something weird. That guy's that's kind of rough.
He's that lion mane thing they all got going on.
Yeah, and some do. They do get the lion mane. That guy's face is, God, just put a bag over his head. Excuse me.
Oh.
I know. This guy's, they cut his horns. Obviously, it looked like that one on the right was heading right into his cheek. But that's a lot nicer fleece than you usually see.
Yeah, I was gonna say, okay. Because I tried to ask him really about fleece. Well, now I've been spinning because I'm crazy. But she always said it's about how you feel it. And so, because I wanted to see if I saw it, is it better fleece if it's crimped or something? But yeah, that one looks really pretty.
Well, and it is hard because you can't and they do, by the way, have a score for fleece, or they'll always have this leasing is wool description. They'll always have this thing, and you know, you can of course then take that and run that through Google Translate. Most of their scoring is focused on color. They want white to be very white with no yellow tan spots mixed in. So what they call good fleece will be like pure snow white. Will have a higher score generally. They often aren't talking about what we call fleece quality with like crimp and fineness, softness, curl. It's more about standardizing white color and length. So you just have to kind of know, oh, this bantha, this guy, look at him. That's I don't see a dip, but I do see the big, powerful, tall neck and probably some mane going on. But yeah, that's impressive. You look at it, and then it's like, okay, what's going on over here? What's going on with these numbers? And you know, how well will this guy work on your ewes is another thing to think about with breeding. And actually, that's something, by the way, really important for meat breeders to consider. If your ewes have the pelvic structure necessary to birth lambs sired by these guys that can be very bulky, that's something to think about.
Ooh.
Yeah. Which, again, the goal there is get them out alive, assess where you're at, if you see a pattern, and then I'll look at prioritizing daughters with, you know, wide rumps and wide build. Because if you've got a bunch of ewes and you put your hand on their loin and on their pelvis and it's narrower, if you try to push too far into carcass too soon, you might really have a very bad lambing season.
Yeah.
Is
So.
that a leader sheep?
No, but he's really scruffy.
Yeah, he
I
looks
think it's like,
tiny.
I think he's also kind of half Rudolph.
Fair.
Again, not a great picture of this guy. And what's also interesting, it's like, okay, what's this guy's story? He's really very middling here. I would suspect he's probably a color choice.
Yeah, that's
And there are
a
people who want to breed for more color, and
either the
yeah,
leader or because he's brown. More it.
yeah, I think so. I would agree. But anyways, I could do this all day, but I really shouldn't.
Sorry. So
I have
bad.
my self-control.
Thank you so
But yeah,
much, Dan. This has been very helpful. I appreciate it.
yeah, I'm glad it's helpful, and I wish it were better organized. And what I'd really love someday is for us to have our own very Icelandic specific kind of version of that big confirmation PDF that like
That would
really
be cool.
breaks down a lot of stuff. But I mean, there's way more than we can really do justice to in a quick hour. So, and it's already been 2. So,
Well, like I say, much
maybe
appreciated.
we can crop the recording.
Oh no.
It's fine. It's fine. We'll still have to test drive and figure out the recording and hosting the record for it. So, not everybody will want to see all the chit chat to the end, but obviously those who are interested can.
I was gonna say I was still learning more there at the very end, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Well, we'll go ahead and close this down, and hopefully the recording didn't blow out with the going over time, and we'll see.
You're good.
All right.
Thank you, Diane.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.